Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And I want to acknowledge that we're meeting on the Coast Salish First Nations territory. This is the Committee of the Whole meeting agenda for Monday, February 23rd, 2015. Budget deliberations continue. And first on the agenda, and there will be a time for public input later for all of those good people that are in the. Thank you very much for coming. We don't have quantity, but we have quality. Thank you very much. So the first item on the agenda is the draft provisional financial plan from the Manager of Finance. So Ms. Lovegrove, would you please proceed? Did I pronounce that?
Yes. Thank you, Your Worship. Tonight we're going to go over the adjustments that we talked about since the last budget meeting that we held on February 4th. So this presentation will outline those what we have done since that meeting. So first of all, we're going to look at the general fund, and then we're going to look at the water fund. We will not be looking at the sewer fund tonight because there were no discernible changes in the sewer fund at all. So we're just going to be talking about what adjustments we looked at and what we did between the general fund and the water fund. So we'll look at the budget adjustments, then we'll present the revised 20-year capital plan. We'll look at the revised 2015 financial plan, and then the proposed surpluses for both of the funds. So starting out with the general fund, just to revise, the building blocks that we're using for the plan right now is 2.5% tax increase in 2015, 3% in 2016 to 2020. An inflation rate of 2% is in 2015 to 2016. Then in the model it increases to 2.5. And again, we do not have any carry forwards in this model. They are still being calculated and will be presented in the final model.
Do we know what the carry forwards are, ballpark figure? Anybody know? No?
So the budget adjustments that we have done since the last meeting, we removed the fire department succession planning amount of $36,000 that was in for 2015. The data tablets, we reallocated to. Okay, how about here? Hello? Just in case. Testing? Can you hear that? Okay. So for the data tablets, we reallocated the amount to an existing funding source. So we basically removed the additional funding source. $40,000 was moved from 2016 and 2017 for the City Hall renovations. That was moved into 2015, so we could utilize it in this year. And then we added $50,000 for Parks Master Plan review in 2016. In the capital, we removed $850,000 from 2016. Hello? Testing. Can you still hear me? Okay. Okay. We removed $850,000 that was scheduled for the new operations building in construction in 2016 and 2017. And we've also removed the community park pathways of $15,000. And we did that because with putting in $50,000 for Parks Master Plan update, we thought that would be better off to wait till the outcome of the master plan.
So if I may for a moment, and if anybody else has it, go ahead, Councillor Patterson. My comments can wait.
That's all right. When are we looking at doing the Parks Master Plan review?
It's scheduled in the budget for 2016.
Thank you.
So on the previous page, the $40,000 from 2016 and 17 for City Hall renovation for engineering staff, and then on the next page, the capital removed $850,000. That comes as a result of the inability to lease that space on the upper floor, better for the workflow in terms of engineering staff, and there's a savings of big bucks for the city. So does anybody want to explain that? Thank you.
If I may, Your Worship, that staff had done a review of the budget, and also the fact that recently, as you say, the space at the hall here has been vacant for a while. We did an investigation, and I guess basically what it comes down to is we're building additional office space, or the plan was to build additional office space for operations staff as part of the treatment plant. We already have some office space here that in the current market is in the foreseeable future not going to be leased. So the thought from staff is, why not utilize that already constructed office space and save $850,000 from building more office space down in the treatment plant. That's the logic there. As part of that, engineering would then move up from the yard to the hall. We also did some investigating there, and just to determine how that would function. We feel that it could function very well. Many municipalities, all the ones that I've been involved with, engineering is up at the hall. It allows us to provide better service as well in terms of supporting the planning department and the various other departments, and also a service to the public. They don't have to then do business in two different places. They can do it all up here at the hall. We also looked at, well, then that $40,000 that was identified for 2016 and 2017, that was for temporary accommodation while we do renovations at the yard. Basically, we would be using that money to move engineering up here, and we wouldn't need it then in 2016 and 2017 because we've already done the move. So basically, it saves $850,000 from the treatment plant, which we thought would be something that you'd be interested in.
Thank you for that initiative. Councillor Salter.
So I just want to clarify. Through the CAO, I just want to clarify that we're talking about that there was no page, but on the last budget we were talking about facilities, new operations buildings, which was renovating a current building at 150 and a new operations building, which was 550. That's what you're talking about, those two numbers, right? Is that right? Are those the numbers we're talking about that we're now not going to be requiring?
If I may, Your Worship, through
the Councillor. 300.
Through to Councillor Salter, they're related, but they're different. In essence, there still has to be renovations to the Public Works building, regardless of what we're doing, which is what you're talking about. In addition to that, we were also looking at, through the water treatment plant, adding additional office space onto that building, again, to accommodate the needs. It was actually Mr. Squire's idea. I thought it was rather brilliant in that we do have vacant office space here. So instead of building additional space down in the yards, we're going to use the existing space we have here to save $850,000 worth of new office space at Public Works. But there still has to be renovations to the existing building.
So thank you. And so when you say there still has to be these renovations, are we then, so these numbers, which we have for 2015, we've got the 150 for renovate current building, and we've got construct a new building at 300,000. Those numbers remain for 2015.
If I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor Salter, yes, that's correct. Unless you can tell me otherwise, I believe those numbers are still there.
The 150 there was 150 in 2 years for the renovation of the Public Works building. There was also a 300,000 and a 550,000 for the new building in the last budget. The new building amounts have been removed. The renovated amounts are still in.
Right. So I just really have to clarify this because I want it straight in my head. So You're pulling the 300 for 2016 and the 550 from 2017? Okay, but we're keeping the 300,150 plus the 20,000 to demolish the old shed. Okay.
So there's an overall saving of a couple of $100,000 overall? Anybody can answer that?
850,000.
That's great. Thank you, and thank you for Mr. Squire for that initiative. Okay, carry on.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Did I miss somebody? Councillor Oates.
But in order for this to work, you're moving the engineering staff up to this building, right? Which requires a $40,000 outlay this year. So really we're saving $810,000.
More or less. There's also changes with regards to operating between the two. For instance, right now operations is housed in ATCO trailers. With the removal of those trailers, there will be some savings operationally as well.
Director of Finance.
Yeah, if I can just further clarify as well, there was $40,000 in 2016 and 17 for temporary housing because the current ATCO building would have to be moved or taken down while they're building the new building, and they were going to have temporary accommodations. That was in the budget, so that's being moved forward. So it was already in the budget, and it's just being moved forward. So it is $850,000 reduction.
So, to conclude that, all in all, it's a great savings, and thanks again to staff for negotiating that. Director of Engineering.
Sorry. Sorry about the interesting comment, but that's just what came to mind. One other thing, if council in the end here decides that that's favorable for them and they want to go through with that, I would be looking for some direction from council to move that $40,000 forward and get engineering up here, because the sooner we do that too, the sooner we save the $16,000 a year renting that ATCO trailer, the sooner that renovation work can begin. So I would look for some direction.
Would we require a motion for that tonight, Mr. CAO? Anybody want to make that motion? Made by Councillor Patterson, seconded by Councillor Greer. Are you seconding the motion? Any discussion on that motion?
What exactly is the motion?
To move the engineering department sooner than later, spending that money now. Okay.
If I may, Your Worship, just for clarification, what Council is approving is advancing the $40,000 from 2016-17 to 2015 and eliminating the $850,000. You're basically making that a resolution for us to go ahead and do that, which would allow engineering to start with the move.
Any further questions on that? All those in favor? Oh, sorry, Councillor Salter.
So then, in this case, once engineering moves up to this building, that's the end of it. There won't be another request for $500,000 or $850,000 in the future to build anything else to house them.
If I may, Your Worship, not in the foreseeable future. I'm not going to say that it's not going to happen 10 or 20 years from now, but definitely not in the foreseeable future.
Okay. Any further questions before I call the vote? All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That's carried. Oh, by the way, I should explain that Councillor Powell has been delayed through work. She'll be here shortly, I hope. Please carry on.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Your Worship, may I ask one other question?
I'm sorry. Yes, Councillor Patterson.
Just in regards to our last conversation, how many engineering staff will be moving into the City Hall?
If I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor Patterson, there is 7 engineering staff, not including myself, and then we'll have a few pieces of office space. I think we're going to have one operations person. The person that takes care of all the buildings will accommodate them there as well, but basically it's 7 staff plus myself.
Councillor Salter.
So I do have questions about the facilities budget here, but I'm not sure if this is the time, so I don't want to hold up and bring it up now if there's a better time.
Sure, go ahead, bring it up now while we're talking about the facilities. Go ahead.
I didn't get a lot of detail on the last one with regard to that $300,000 that we're wanting to, I believe, build a new shop, plus the $150,000, I think, was to put up some metal frame of some sort. And at some point I heard 12 by 12 or 12,000 square feet, but I don't really know what it was that 12,000 square feet meant. Was that the $300,000 building that we're building, or was that metal? I'm assuming it's renovating the current building is the $150,000. I'm not sure. Maybe I could get some information on that, because I'm not clear on that.
Who can answer
If
that?
I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor Salter, in the budget there was renovate current offices, $150,000 for 2016 and 17. There was also new building for $850,000. There was also the new hangar for $300,000 in 2015. The new hangar is the big metal building that is still in the budget.
Yes, go ahead.
So the hangar is the $300,000 cost.
The $300,000 that's in 2015 is what was in the 2015 budget. There is still some monies left over from 2014 that were unspent that will be carried forward to facilitate the completion of that hangar. But this time we're still calculating how much of that is going to be brought forward into 2015.
So through the chair, so are you saying that $300,000 is not perhaps the actual amount that we're looking at this time? It would be a different number once we find out how much we're going to carry forward?
$300,000 is what was allotted for the 2015 budget. There will be further monies probably brought forward from 2014 to cover the revenue to offset the expense. So it will be a nil effect on the budget. Carry forwards come over with a budget amount for an expense as well as a revenue amount because we're taking it out of a reserve. So it doesn't have any added effect on the numbers that are in the budget right now.
Okay. And then my next question, so, and that is a building that we have to put up these metal hangers, is that correct? It's metal pipes or whatever it is that creates this building. That's what needs to be put up. Am I right? Really want to understand what we're spending this on. And I don't. And if I don't understand, I can't vote for it.
Through your worship, if I may. The metal hangar is a building we pre-purchased 3 years ago from the Air Cadets in the Qualicum Airport. It was, I believe, $80,000. It's a prefabricated steel building. The purpose of it is for a new shop to replace the existing shop down there. Simply put, we're growing to the point where we do not have the space in our current shop. So this is 3 years in the making, and the new shop, which is the Air Cadets hangar, is 12,000 square feet. So it's a prefabricated steel building.
Director of Finance.
Thank you, Your Worship. I can also clarify the carry forward on that building is $502,000, if my memory is correct from today when I was looking at it. So that would be carried forward from 2014 budget into 2015 on top of the $300,000.
Any further questions, Councillor Salter?
So does that mean that you were going to have a couple $100,000 left over then? Is that what you're saying? Really?
No, I'm saying what the budget will be in 2015 when we get the carry forward in there will be the $300,000 plus the $502, so $802,000, of which $502,000 is funded with 2014 revenues.
Oh, I see. So you need the additional amount to put this building up then? Okay. And so then I do have another question, which is, do you put this
Can
out
we
to-
make this the last question?
Well, no, because I have to understand it.
Okay, go ahead.
Because if I have to vote on it on behalf of the people of
Go
Parkville,
ahead.
I need to
Continue.
understand what I'm doing.
Carry on.
So, so this building, has it been put out to RFP? Like, has that occurred? Like, how do we know it's going to cost this much? That's a lot of money. It's almost $1 million to put up something that's already prefabricated.
Mr. Squire.
Through your worship, no, it has not been put out to RFP. The cost estimate was based on a engineering estimate that we received at time of purchase 3 years ago.
Follow up. So does that mean the city will put it up then? The city staff will put it up, or will it then go out to RFP?
CEO?
If I may, Your Worship, with most budget items, until we actually go out for a request for a proposal or a contract, we don't know exactly what the cost is going to be. This is the best order of magnitude accuracy that we can get. When it actually goes to construction of the building, we will be going out for either a contract, a tender, or a request for proposal, at which time we'll get the best bids that we possibly can. Hopefully they will be under budget, but the reality is that the possibility is that they may be over. This is the best order of magnitude that we can come up with now based on engineering estimates as to what it would cost to erect the thing for the purposes of budget. But when we actually go to construct it, we will be going out for a request for proposal or tender.
Okay, carry on.
Thank you, Your Worship. We've looked at their spending packages, and we revised the spending packages. So what is showing in front of you and what is in your handout, those are the revised spending packages that we're going forward with. Just for the operating without the staffing, it's $158,300, and the staffing packages are $186,500 for a full annual
Councillor
cost.
Greer has a question.
Thank you, Your Worship. Going back to the last frame, you mentioned the $24,000 for a server network and firewall security. I've consulted with 3 pretty good specialists in computers. They tell me that this is just a fly on the wall, $24,000. They could spend $200,000 and it wouldn't be secure. And they tell me that and I don't know anything about computers and firewalls and security. However, they tell me this is no amount of money at all. So it would be a waste of money to spend that. One chap works for the armed services in Ottawa, and they spent $3 million, and everybody still can get into their computers. So he's saying $24,000 is a total loss of money. So I don't know who wants to speak to that, but it's a frivolous amount of money for what you're expecting to have happen.
Director of Admin.
Yes, Your Worship, through to Councillor Greer. The purpose of this is not to secure our system. The purpose of this is to find the vulnerabilities in our system so that we can take a measured and appropriate response to try and make us as secure as possible. It's impossible to make any computer, even the DND computers, 100% secure. But the City of Parksville system has never been evaluated to determine where our vulnerabilities lie. Now, there may be some obvious vulnerabilities that we can fix at a minimal cost. There may be others that we just have to say, to address it, it's far too expensive, and we are just going to have to go along with what we have. But until we actually know what our vulnerabilities are, we don't know what it would take to address them or where they reside. And that's the purpose of this, is to find out where those vulnerabilities reside.
Just to follow up on that, so what you're saying, we're spending $24,000 to find out where our weaknesses are, and then it's going to cost us, and we don't know, how much more money to make it secure?
Well, quite frankly, I don't know, Your Worship, through to Councillor Greer, if we could ever make it secure any more than the military can make theirs secure or banks can make theirs secure. But the point is that there may be some obvious glaring areas of concern that we can fix with a minor cost or work that we can do in-house. The best practices guides for information services recommend doing these, I guess, fact-finding explorations every 3 to 5 years because of the continued and growing level of cybercrime and hacking that we're all subject to on a daily basis. So the intent is not to spend $24,000 and expect that we are completely secure. It is to find out where we are not secure and what we can do in-house to secure our systems.
And our IT people can't help us with that? We have, how many, 3 IT people?
We have 2 IT people, and they are not experts in the security field.
No. It seems like a lot of money just to find out something that maybe can't be corrected in the long run anyways.
But we don't know without finding out if it can be corrected.
Yeah.
Maybe it can. Maybe there are vulnerabilities that can be corrected.
Well, just a question I have, and I see some other computer items there which I know nothing about, and that's unfortunate that I don't know how many council knows anything about the computer hardware, servers, and firewall, and so on. But we continue to spend thousands in technology. Can you tell me what was the expected payback on this? And how do you measure this, and what are the results? I mean, we spend a lot of money on computers and software and technology, and is it paying off, or is it just somebody selling us equipment and someone selling us more hardware and so on?
Well, to be frank, Your Worship, through to Councillor Greer, we are not what one would term a high-tech organization. We are using systems that are fairly basic. And the systems that we are using are designed to create greater efficiencies with the number of people and resources that we have at our disposal to continue to do our daily work. The computer hardware, the servers and the firewall are just standard computers and the ancillary services. We budget to replace our systems every 3 years. We have not been able to do that recently because of our resources. So we are now moving into year 4 and year 5 on a lot of our equipment. Now, thankfully, at this point in time, equipment has not progressed so far in the last 3 years that our computers that we're working on a regular basis are unusable. It just slows down. And when the computer systems slow down, the productivity slows down. With respect to the software that we are purchasing, the software is designed to make us more efficient. For instance, what we did was if I can use bylaw as an example, we put a computer in the bylaw van and we networked it to the city's network. So now when the bylaw officer goes out on his calls, instead of making handwritten notes and then having to stop doing his rounds an hour and a half ahead of the end of the day and coming back to the hall and then taking his notes and putting into the network, he can now sit in his van after he does a call and put his notes directly into the network and his pictures as well. They're immediately accessible by the staff here at City Hall, who can then process the tickets and the pictures and create the file and carry it through the system. So there's a huge efficiency and time saver in that type of software. With respect to the Tempest software, that was initiated before I came to the city, but for instance, Prospero is part of the Tempest software, and I know the Director of Planning is well versed in Prospero. We are moving from keeping our property information on recipe cards, literally recipe cards, to the point where now staff can sign into the Tempest system and put in the address and pull up all of the information that is required for them to do their jobs. I mean, that's what we're trying to do with the computer systems and the ancillary peripherals that we have, is because we have a limited number of people to do the volume of work, and we are aiming for efficiencies here so that we're not increasing the people, as much as we would need to do if we were still doing everything manually by hand. So that's where our computer costs are going towards. It's efficiency and effectiveness and increased productivity.
So what you're saying is the expected payback is huge compared to what we're spending.
Yes.
Thank you.
The other comment I'd like to make, just having bought a new computer with Windows 8, which has been a real learning experience, but I guess the technology is improving and changing all the time. I know that I have to make updates on my computer on a regular basis, so I would imagine we'll see more and more of these new systems that'll be there to protect and secure and so forth and so on.
Well, I mean, we're looking at upgrading our Microsoft licenses this year because they haven't been updated for several years. And, you know, like you say, you're working with Windows 8, and we're needing to upgrade people. We don't upgrade things on an annual basis. We upgrade them when there has been significant enough change in the software or in the programming that it makes the change worthwhile.
If we have, for example, 35 computers or 40 computers, they've all got to be done on an individual basis. They can't be done as a massive system. It's got to be done on an individual computer basis. Well,
they have been done on an individual computer basis. In this past year, we have been working on what is called creating clones. So you create a clone of the system, and then instead of rebuilding each and every individual computer, you use that clone to automatically put in the software that everybody uses. And then what you're doing on an individual basis is just inputting the software that that particular person needs for perhaps some specialized aspects of what they do.
Thank you, Your Worship. So those are the operating spending packages that we still have in the budget. The staffing ones are there. There has been a slight change to the bylaw officer, and the only change is this amount for the operating has been reduced by $5,000 because it has come to my attention that that was for the equipment for the vehicle, so it has been moved over to the vehicle. The net amount is still the same, it's just that $5,000 has moved from operating over to capital. So the total operating spending packages are $344,800.
On this particular side, I think there'll be some questions. Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I question in some length the need for 2 more city staff people along with a vehicle. And I've done a little research as far as the health and safety coordinator is concerned and also the bylaw enforcing. And I checked a few cities that are relatively close to ours. And Courtenay was one, and they have a population of 25,000, and they have a staff, 120 staff. They have 1 bylaw enforcing officer and 1 HS officer. To go on further, Port Alberni's got 20,000 population, 137 staff, 1 bylaw enforcing officer, 1 HS. Powell River, 20,000 people. They got an unusually high staff of 200. I can't hardly believe that. 2 part-time bylaw enforcing officers totaling 50 hours a week and 1 HS. Go to Merritt, they got 65 people working at the city, 1 bylaw enforcing officer and no HS. Same with Castleguard, 85 employees, 1 bylaw enforcing officer and 0 HS. So it seems to me there's a lot of communities, and these were just picked at random that I phoned and found out the stats on, that we have a bylaw and a half officer with only 12,000 population, which seems quite low, and the need for an HS person at this particular time I don't think is necessary considering the number of staff that we have. So I would hope that Council would take a long look at this and come up with some questions and maybe some answers. Thanks.
Councillor Salter.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I did something similar to what Councillor Greer did, except I took the percentages. So for Courtenay, for instance, with a population of 25,000, 1 bylaw officer, they're doing 334% more than our bylaw officers are because we have 1.6. The City of Nanaimo, they have a population of 86,000. They have 9 bylaw officers, 2 parking commissionaires, And so that breaks down to one bylaw officer for every 10,200 people. So they're doing 136% more than we are. Comox, with a population of 65,000, have one bylaw officer, and they're doing 868% more workload than Parksville does. Duncan has, one bylaw officer, two commissioners, and 5,000 people. I absolutely agree with Councillor Greer. I don't see this. I don't see us adding another position for bylaw officer. The most I would consider would be taking the 1.6 and taking the 0.6 and making it one full-time position, but nothing more. And as far as the health and safety coordinator, I couldn't find one, so I don't see Parksville requiring one. It's something that most businesses do off the side of their desk. We all have to do it. It is WCB required for sure, but we're doing it off the sides of our desks, and everyone is doing it, and it is difficult. It's additional work, but that's the reality here. And we just last meeting we increased taxes by 7%. So now we have to pay the piper, and that means we don't spend more now. It's one or the other.
Yes, go ahead, Councillor Greer.
Yeah, one item I missed was the hospital in Nanaimo, 2,200 employees, and they have one HS person for 2,200 employees. And I don't know what we're talking here with employees, maybe 70, So it just doesn't make any sense to me.
Any further questions on these positions from Councillor Patterson?
Thank you, Your Worship. The thing about the bylaw enforcement officer, I think that our community has a hard time with is that it's a 9 or 8 to 4 Monday to Friday type position. So for me to accept it, it would have to be different hours for that second person. So I don't know whether or not staff has considered that at all.
Any further questions on these particular items? Councillor Beale.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to add that, in line with Councillor Salter and Councillor Greer, I really question the addition of these positions at this particular time, and considering the knowing that the expenses that we will need to put out for the water treatment and for a number of big ticket items that are coming along, we may very well need to have some increases for our residents, and certainly the water and sewer is one example, 2 examples of that. But I think we also want to keep things as constrained as possible, and I'm not sure. I think we could manage without these additional positions for the coming year.
What about the engineering summer student? At the last meeting, the last budget meeting we had, I didn't hear any objections to that. It's been working well. It's the co-op program. Any objections to that?
Thank you, Your Worship. I don't have too much trouble with it. The 16,000, and what I wanted to know is how many hours this person works. They must be working, 4 or 5 months, or is it part-time throughout the year?
If I may, Your Worship, that amount of funding reflects 4 months of full-time work for this
4 months?
4 months, yeah.
4 months. I certainly don't have any trouble with that if we can eliminate the other 2 and the car.
With regards to the statistics we heard this evening, or just a moment ago, from Councillor Greer and Councillor Salter, CAO, what are the chances? Are we talking apples and apples, or are we talking apples and oranges? We've got a large population, small staff.
If I may, Your Worship, those statistics were based on, I guess, per capita cost. That doesn't necessarily mean the number of calls or bylaw complaints that one community versus another is getting. It doesn't necessarily relate to what's acceptable to that community for the type of bylaw compliance service that they want to get. It really comes down to a service issue. As I said at the last meeting, We are constantly getting complaints of people that are phoning in for bylaws saying it's 2 and 3 and 4 days since I had my call. Nobody's come to question. If that's acceptable, then we can continue to go with the 1.6 bylaw compliance officers. If it's not, the only way to cut those response times is to provide additional resources.
Thank you. Okay. Yes, Councillor Beal.
Just a quick follow-up. It does sound like there are some efficiencies planned for, though, with the additional technology, which also might help, at least to some small degree, with this issue.
Councillor Oates.
Just to follow up on Councillor Beal's comments there, I understood the technology already exists, so there's no expected efficiencies in that department. Okay. With respect to the health and safety coordinator position, when it was presented to us previously, it was, I believe it was stated that this is going to get done regardless. So who is going to be tasked with this additional work?
If I may, Your Worship, the existing staff will continue to do it. To a large degree, our Director of Human Resources does a fairly large portion of it, as does the Director of Operations. The two main areas where where the operations is the main issue. So it will continue to be done. It's something that's required. We will be doing it. But the more time that these people are spending doing occupational health and safety requirements, the less time they're doing managing the other affairs of the city, trying to be proactive as opposed to reactive. So there is a cost associated to doing it.
Councillor Oates and Councillor Powell.
And with respect to the bylaw officer, I think it was just mentioned earlier, but when that was presented to us earlier, it's because this is a direct result of inquiries from the public and an expressed concern that the service level is not at a level that they expect.
If I may, Your Worship, that's exactly why it's being brought forward, is public concerns with the service levels.
Councillor Powell, then Councillor Salter, then Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to the CAO. When we had this brought to us last time, didn't we also discuss if we made any money with the bylaw enforcement officer? And isn't there an ability to start being more forceful when we're applying the bylaws?
If I may, Your Worship, the current directive that we're under is compliance as opposed, or to use bylaw enforcement to obtain compliance through other means other than ticketing or punitive measures. If Council wants us to be more punitive, we can certainly do that. More tickets conceivably could increase revenues, but with more tickets there also comes more disputes, and the adjudication process and possibly legal process to enforce those tickets. So it's not necessarily a revenue generator as you might think. There would be costs associated with issuing more tickets.
Councillor Salter.
So this is 2015, and I know that there are some here who know that we are in a 7-year cycle this year. And so part of being in that 7-year cycle means that we're going to be looking at a possible economic downturn. And so recognizing that and recognizing the 7-year cycles, and those of us who don't, I can very quickly, 2001, 2008, Lehman Brothers tanked, 2001 crash, I mean, the 1929, those are all 7-year cycles. And so I'm not saying we're going to crash this year, but we need to be aware that we're in a 7-year cycle, and we need to act accordingly. And I think being cautious this year, we might want to look at this at another time. But this year, we need to be cautious, and we need to be diligent. And I think spending additional money, as I said, we've just increased taxes for the people of the city. And so we don't get it both ways. We have to be diligent, and we have to be cautious this year. Thank you.
Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Your Worship. I couldn't agree more with Councillor Salter. I'm sure we are going to run into some hard times this year with the way the financial crisis is around the world. And also, when you look at the bylaw enforcing officer, even from my standpoint as a businessman, we're spending over $100,000 now, and we're looking to spend over another $100,000 with the new car, and it brings in $35,000. I mean, it absolutely doesn't make any sense at all. And if we're just trying to service people and we're going to pick up the cost on that, then we can't service them. And I might also say that when I phoned these cities, I had a lot of good conversation with them, and they also have a difficult time with the number of calls that they have. But they just tell me there's nothing more in their budget and they're not going to be adding any more people. But they have much bigger population than we do, so they get an awful lot more calls than we do, I'm sure. But they're sticking with the fact that this is all they have to work with. Thanks.
I have a question for the CAO. At the last budget meeting, we talked about in the summertime you've taken an employee from the operations side of the business and brought them in to help out with the bylaw. Is that cost neutral, or is there a cost to that? It doesn't show up here.
If I may, Your Worship, that would be, I guess, a hybrid of a full-time bylaw compliance officer. We do not do that right now. We had a situation in the not too distant past where one of our existing bylaw compliance officers was unavailable to us. We had an opportunity to bring in another employee from Public Works who had an interest in bylaw compliance to fill that vacancy. But as far as summer staff or seasonal staff, we've never done that. That would be a hybrid if you wanted to add additional bylaw compliance part-time through the summer. That would be a possibility.
Well, I know that speaking for myself with regards to the bylaw officer and the bylaw complaints, I've never been approached in terms of complaints with regards to the slowness or the lack of, or the amount of time that it takes. And so I think that the die is probably pretty much cast. To take a comment from Councillor Salter, we can monitor this thing as it goes along and sees what happens in the upcoming years in terms of what the impact that might have on the organization and what the impact that might have on staff. What about, in this amount of money, $186,000, the car would have been for the bylaw officer, so the car would come out if the bylaw officer is not approved. Okay, thank you. Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Worship. You know, we've discussed this situation considerably, and I'm sure councillors must have their mind made up one way or another. Rather than kick this can down the road for another month or so, I don't know why we couldn't make a decision on this tonight.
Well, I think that's premature. I think that there's a lot of other issues we're going to go through this evening, and there's no hurry. We don't need to pass a budget until May 15th of this year. I don't see any rush. We can make some decisions tonight in terms of what we don't want to approve, but in terms of the overall budget, I think that there should be other budget meetings, that there are a number of other things to discuss, as we'll see on some of the future pages that are listed. Councillor Oates.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think we should make our decisions after a full and wholesome conversation and not make them in isolation. But just keen on something that Councillor Patterson said there, and I don't know if that's what she meant there, but I don't know. I think there's a desire for the public to see a presence of the bylaw officers on the weekend in the community park, and that sort of thing. You know, if that sort of thing, if that's something that we think the public wants to have, to close the door totally on any kind of a bylaw officer improvement precludes us any opportunity of doing that. You know, and if we believe that we don't have any issues down there, I think, you know, when we went around as a council and we talked about things that we'd like to see happen, I think to a person, we all talked about beautification. I talked about flowers, Al talked about doing something at the beach, but we're all talking about the same thing, you know, and I think we could all agree on the community park down there, and maybe we do want to see an increased enforcement of some of the bylaws with respect to the community park, and especially people down feeding raw meat to seagulls and such, and that sort of thing. I think there's opportunities for us to improve the experience down at the community park, and I don't know if being more stringent about the enforcement of our bylaws is the answer, but I know if we closed the door on that opportunity prematurely, we might have lost an opportunity, and so I'm a little bit, you know, I'm a little bit concerned about that. Just my thoughts.
I know in the summertime there's a great deal of complaints about dogs not on leash on the beach. Councillor Beale.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a comment from someone who's lived in the community a long time, and I also live not too far from the community park. It's one thing that the complaints that I hear might be more about partying or drinking, and those sorts of complaints that I consider as a resident to be of an even more serious nature overall. And one thing that's been really appreciated is having a presence of RCMP members on bicycles. And so although they are not bylaw enforcement officers per se, but when we do have an increased visible presence of RCMP on bicycles in and around the community, I think that also serves to maybe just make residents and visitors a little more mindful of their behavior in our public areas.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. And there's a couple of the operating spending packages that do impact future years, and that's the Springwood Park tennis courts, which we have in for every 8 years, and the fire department succession planning still retains an amount of $18,000 in the year 2016. On the capital side, for the spending packages, we basically just have the three now: engineering, survey equipment, the Springwood Park pathways, and the bylaw vehicle, for a total of $65,000.
Just to clarify, that vehicle comes out if we don't have the bylaw officer? Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. These are the other items to be considered. They are not in the budget as it stands right now. We discussed the first two at the last meeting. The subsequent ones have come up since then. So we have the Vancouver Island North Film Commission request for $2,500, the Vancouver Island Tribute Festival request for $1,000, Guardians of Mid-Island Estuary request for $8,000, the Curling Club permissive exemption request, the Chamber Business Awards request for $350, an archival storage building slated for 2015 and 16 for the $600,000, community park user fees, and sports field user fees.
I like big numbers, so archival storage building, can somebody talk about the pros and cons about why that's being proposed, please?
Okay, this arose from the consideration of the renovations taking place down at the yard and the $850,000 in cost savings that we are anticipating as a result of the renovations and not building the new building. The City of Parksville has been in existence for 70 years, and we have many, many records dating back to those early days which have never been in an appropriate facility where they are protected from degradation, from heat, light, dust, where they are protected from fire or vandalism. The idea was to construct a bare bones archival storage building at the yard with the appropriate environmental controls. We went to an engineering firm for a basic order of magnitude cost estimate, and it came in at approximately $600,000.
Would that, where are the files now, just to refresh my memory?
The files are located in a storage room on the second floor of PCTC. They are down at the yard. They are in the various city departments and sitting on shelves.
Would there be a greater use of more space? Would it make things more
There would be
more available?
There would be a tremendous amount more space because we would be able to see in this building we can't use mobile compact shelving because of the weight restrictions on the floor joists aren't sufficient enough to support it. But in an archival storage building, we would be able to use the appropriate types of mobile compact shelving, which would give us another, in addition to the 70 years worth of records that we currently have, another 50 to 100 years of record storage.
Isn't there is there some legal requirements here in terms if you get into a lawsuit situation or to go back and?
Absolutely. I have personal experience with local governments not storing their records properly, the records degrading, the records then being subpoenaed for a court case, and in order to restore those records, paying $1,200 for one 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper that had to be restored.
Councillor Salt.
Thank you, and I want to speak to this, but there was some other things. But so I also work for government. We were storing our paper for eons, and because of the cost, we've stopped doing that. So we're no longer saving paper. It is all on disk or on computer programs. That's how it's being saved. We have no paper files anymore. And the reason being is the cost to store it and the cost to retrieve it, if it's ever required. It's quite simple to retrieve something that has been archived in our system within moments rather than driving to a physical place and digging it up. So I don't think we've saved any money. I don't think we saved money by not doing something, by that $800,000. We didn't save it because we're not spending it. We only save it if we don't spend it. And so spending part of it now on $600,000 means we didn't save it at all. So this doesn't compute for me. And I don't think that this is the way to go. I think we should be looking at doing this electronically anyways, because that's where we're going to be in 150 years from now. Sure.
Well, if I could respond to that, Your Worship. The problem with converting all of your records to electronics is that as technology changes, so does the ability to retrieve that electronic information. Electronic information, whether it's microfiche or disks or USBs or on a cloud somewhere, also have to be, not if it's on a cloud, but have to be stored in an appropriate medium. So whether you've got tapes or whether you've got microfiche or whether you've got disks or whether you've got USBs, those also need to be stored appropriately and managed appropriately so that they too don't degrade. And one of the problems with the electronic documents is that those forms of electronic mediums change and software changes. And it's sort of like going from beta to VCR. You can't read beta anymore unless you've got an ancient piece of equipment. That is also the case with electronic medium, is that when that medium changes, then you have to take all of your records all over again and restore them. And every time you restore them, you run the risk of degrading them. You run the risk of them no longer being acceptable for legal purposes because of the it has to be an appropriate manner in which they're changed, because they have to be acceptable by a court of law, and they're not always acceptable.
Yeah, follow up, Councillor Salter.
Sorry, through the chair. And so, because I work for the province, I know that we spend a lot of time in court. And when we do, we take the documents that we have stored electronically, and that's what we use when we take cases to court. That's what we take. That's what we retrieve, and the cost is less than physically storing paper in a building somewhere. So that is what the province is doing. The feds have gone to it. I'm not sure why we would continue to save paper now. It's not going to last for 150 years, number one, and number two, the cost at this time, we can't afford it. The cupboard's bare. So I think it's an additional cost that we can't afford right now.
Councillor Greer, and then Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Your Worship. I couldn't agree more, again, with Councillor Salter. It seems like it's foolish to have a big, huge building full of paper, and you'd have to somehow have it laid out in such a way that you'd be able to get information quickly, and that seems like an old-fashioned way to me. So it doesn't seem feasible at all to spend that kind of money on a building and then have it full of paper that has to be somehow sorted out so you could retrieve it quickly. The other thing, and I don't know whether you want to discuss the storage building anymore, but looking at the top 5 items on this spending spree that we're on, there's 4 things that I consider important for the city to support. And one is...
Could we just deal with the 600,000
okay,
and then we'll move on?
Okay.
Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Your Worship. As everyone knows, I too work for the government, and I work for a different ministry than Councillor Salter, and we do keep paper files. They call them off-site, and because I go to court and I represent clients, and we need the actual court documents, we need all of that stuff, and it needs to be the paper. So I think that while some ministries in the government are using electronically, we do still have ministries that require the paper copies, and so, but 600,000 is a hard number to swallow.
Is it correct to say that this whole issue, first of all, I would think there's a time limit. It's not reasonable for somebody to want to go back 35 years to get a document. That can't be legal, can it? It's legal? So there's a risk here. If we leave things as they are, the risk is that at some point in time, if we've got taken into court and we can't find the document, what's the consequence to the city at that point in time?
It depends on how critical that document might be to that particular court case. I mean, we could lose if we don't have the proper documentation. And, you know, I've also worked for the province in my career, and I know that I worked for the same ministry that Councillor Powell does, and yes, paper was extremely important to us, and it is in local government as well. It has taken the courts a long time to come around to considering electronic documents as legally acceptable in a court of law. And there is still a great deal of uncertainty around things like emails and texts. And there are a lot of protocols that have to be in place to convince the court of the veracity of those records. We are talking about the city's history here. We're talking about the records that were created by the very first council that sat here. We're talking about pictures. We're talking about decisions councils have made. Those are bylaws, whether they've been repealed or not, are legal documents. Those are statutes that have been created by the people that have gone before us here. And I have a legal responsibility under the Act to provide council with the best possible advice that I can give you with regard to the ongoing maintenance and preservation of those records. This is my best advice to you. I was appalled when I came to Parksville, and unfortunately, and I hate to say it, but I was at the way we store our records. We are leaving ourselves wide open to various forms of liability. And I know it's expensive, but if we can't maintain our legal responsibility down the road, and if we are subject to liability as a result, $600,000 may at some point in time look like a small number. This is the best advice that I can provide to you, and it's certainly up to council what they choose to do with it.
So what you're telling us is that this is a question of risk. What amount of risk are we prepared to take by leaving things the way they are rather than spending this money? Okay. Councillor Salter, Councillor Greer, anybody else?
Through the chair, thank you. So how long have these documents been stored as they are so far?
Since the city started storing records. We've never had...
Since what date? Like how long are we looking?
Well, we have 70 years worth of records.
So we've got 70 years worth of records,
yes.
And we've made it this far, and now we need $600,000 because now it's not okay. So I just bringing back to it, this is a Shemita year. It's a 7-year cycle year. We really need to be cautious with our spending this year.
Your Worship, if I may, it's not that it's become an issue now. It was an issue when I came here. It was an issue when I came here 3 years ago. It was an issue for the people who were here before me. It's been an issue for people for a long, long time, but there has never been an impetus to do anything about it. When the funds were no longer required to construct a new building at Public Works, it looked like an opportunity was presenting itself that we may be able to address that in this year. And it was done over 2015, 2016, because initially what we would be looking at would be maybe up to $200,000 in the first year to do the design work, and then the balance in the construction. If council deems that it is not the appropriate time to deal with this, that is council's decision. I am just pointing out that this has been a long-standing issue. It's not getting better. We are more and more challenged to find storage areas. We have culled our records. We have put in a new records management system. We have done all sorts of things. We've gone into an electronic system for storing our reports and records, even though we are still required to keep our paper copies. We are working on a regular basis to maintain and do the best that we can to preserve the records that we have. The cost of digitizing all of the city's records is horrendous. We've looked into that. The cost of microfiching the city's records is horrendous. We've looked into that. At this point in time, this was an opportunity that presented itself. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been coming forward.
Thank you, Your Worship. $600,000 is a lot of money. And what size of building does that build? And how full will it be when we put all the paper in there? And will we need a librarian to look after it? Are we looking at another staff member? So
Your Worship, it would be a 1,400 square foot building. We would probably be about half full at that point and give ourselves room to grow for the next coming. It is a storage facility. It is not a working archive. There's a big difference. What we are looking at doing is building archival quality storage so that we have the biggest thing. It's a plain, no frills, cement slab type concrete building, but it has the appropriate environmental controls in it in order to maintain our records. That's where the big thing is. And no, you wouldn't need another staff person because we're maintaining our records now with the staff that we have. We can certainly maintain them with in an ongoing manner with the staff that we have. If we were coming to you to build a full-scale archives, it would be a completely different story and it would be a lot more expensive.
So to put this discussion in perspective about the archival storage building, it becomes a case of what risk council's prepared to take. This is council's decision. Okay. What I'd like to do, if there's no more questions on this particular item, I'd like to go back now that we've dealt with the big elephant in the room with regards to the $600,000, and just a final comment: the $600,000 would diminish the $850,000 that we've just saved. Would come out of that money, would, in terms of a pot, that would come out of that money. Okay. All right, the Vancouver Island North Film Commission, $2,500. Comments from council? Councillor Greer and Councillor Oates and Councillor Beal.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would deal with the top 5 items because
Please deal with one item at a time so we don't, everybody talking about from the same, about the same
it's all
item.
money that's coming out of the contingency fund, and I would like, I know that we have line articles on Arts Council, the July 1st weekend, Beach Fest, and the Brant Festival, and I agree that those 4 items should be a line item on our budget. They are, and I realize that. So to me, those are the 4 large functions that we have in the community. And I'm still against spending little bits of money here and there and everybody that comes to council. And here again, we've talked about the film festival last year. We decided it wasn't worth it. We turned it down. We heard the Guardians of the Mid-Island Estuary. They've had 3 years. They've had 3 years and $25,000. I understand they got $15,000 from the Recreational Commission. Now they want more money and more time. We all know what the problem is, and we've wasted a lot of time with them.
Okay, we'll get to that one. Deal with the North Island Film Commission. Pro or con? You're against it, obviously.
I'm against it.
Okay. Councillor Oates, Councillor Beal.
I believe this council passed a motion to have those folks come before us and present their case. So I'm comfortable against throwing that out of the budget discussion until they've had an opportunity to come and make their case. We did pass that as a motion, and I think in good faith we should extend that group that opportunity to come in here and convince us.
Councillor Beal.
Those were precisely the points I wanted to make, that we did have a motion and we were to invite them to come and speak before we made decisions about them.
All right, Vancouver Island Tribute Festival. Last year we gave them $1,000. Is there any comments on this particular item? Councillor Powell, Councillor Beal.
Thank you, Your Worship. I spoke last time this came forward, and the Vancouver Island Tribute Festival brings economic development into the community. It was well received last year. It's going to have more performers this year. I think it would be $1,000 well spent out of our contingency fund.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would also like to speak in favor of this particular group and their request. Thinking back to the Beach Festival has really grown, and Sandcastle, and I think we all agree it puts Parksville on the map. I think that this particular festival is a little bit unique, in the area, and it could be something that could grow and bring a lot of positive energy and attention to our town, and for that reason I think I would like to support it.
Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Your Worship. It isn't that I'm certainly against the $1,000. It's my feeling with these organizations that they have ample time to go out and raise that on their own. I'm not so sure whether taxpayers should are expected to pay for everything that comes before council. Just in the last 2 weeks, we raised, $20,000 for the coldest night. So we have a problem with homeless people, and yet we still hand out money for places like this where they can go out and raise their own money. Every organization is responsible for themselves, and they should certainly spend some time and try to raise the money themselves. I don't think they raise much more money than this $1,000, so it's easy for them to come to council and just ask for the money. I think they can raise it.
Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. From a business standpoint, I get probably at least 8 requests a week for different organizations in this community. I think that although they didn't raise as much money in last year, I think it's an organization that can grow, and that it's in the off season as well. And my fellow councillors have also mentioned that, Beach Fest has grown. I think there's possibilities here.
Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Worship. The $1,000 would go to a sponsorship. We would have advertising at the event. We'd be beyond the posters. We'd be on the programs as well. So this isn't a freebie. And I think I did send out the email that I received from that organization about the funds and how they raised different in kind for their festival. They're paying for the travel, but the performers are doing it on their time, and they're not charging for it. Hotels have chipped in kind with rooms, etc. So we're not talking about $1 cash in hand. We're talking about in-kind donations, and I think $1,000 is a small price to pay for that kind of advertisement in that venue.
Okay, we're going to move on to the Guardians of the Mid-Island Estuaries, and I'm sorry that I missed that meeting, that presentation, but I just wanted to clarify in my own mind. I talked briefly to the CAO today. The presentation that was made, the recommendation is for a call by the two presenters, Mr. Claremont and Mr. Cooper. Sorry, did I hear wrong? I thought I read in the paper that it was a call.
I said.
Okay. Please bring me up to speed on that, because I'm all in favor of a call. So, Councillor Beale.
Now, be careful; they'll start calling some of us Elmer Fudd. But the people who did come and speak did explain that they are working on a report that isn't quite complete, and that they do want to present the findings, but they wanted to come with some preliminary information at this time. So I understand that the report would be complete mid-March, and although this amount here says $8,000, that is just extrapolating that it would be the same as previously. They did not give a dollar amount. They did just say at this time that they will be looking for our support in their continued efforts, that they will be bringing, when they bring the report, they will actually bring, the request is to work with the city to look at the possible options, because they are limited to some degree because of federal regulations and others, that they can't just decide that, okay, this is what they're going to do. So they want to work with the city to look at a management plan for the geese. Then someone on council, I believe, asked the question about a cull, and that's where the conversation went.
May I, Councillor Salter? My recollection of giving them the money that we gave them over the last 3 years was that they were to make a recommendation whether or not to call. That was my understanding, and if that's not what they're going to do, then I'm not going to be very happy. Councillor Salter.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want for all of us to keep something in mind, and that's I think our perspective on this is, gave you $25,000, geese aren't gone, beat it. But they can't do that, because these geese didn't get the memo. They're coming in, they're flying in from points all over the world. And so when I think of the geese call, I don't see this as being a one-time fix. I see this as being something that has to happen ongoing to keep those numbers down. A cull won't do it either, because all they're going to do is breed. They have more than one egg in their nest at a time. So if they're not all addled, and they're not, we're going to continually have more and more geese. Now, all I'm saying is, I think when we see the report, when we speak to them, when we think about this, we might want to think about it in a different way. We might want to think about it as it is an ongoing issue. Yes, they're eating the sedges, and they're impacting our beaches and all those things. But we have to, I think, look at this as an ongoing issue, and it might be an ongoing issue in the spring, because that's when they breed. But this isn't a one-shot deal. The $25,000 was never going to get rid of them, and neither will a cull, and neither will addling. It's got to be a process, and slowly bringing those numbers down.
Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Worship. It was my understanding at the end of that presentation that when the report comes out with recommendations, that this group wanted to work with the city and other stakeholders and develop work towards the plan, given the restrictions around the federal and provincial governments. And so that's what the extra dollars were for. So that could be in kind, that could also be time of staff, etc. And so then it's going to come out with the recommendations of what we're going to do or what we need to do, but then this is to implement what the recommendations are.
Okay, Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Worship. To get back to the number of geese that we have about 1,500 local geese that never go south. The ones that come in on their flight to the north or wherever they're going, or if this is as far as they go, they have their eggs and their little chicks and so on, but those are wild ones. They will follow the adults back to the south or wherever they go at that stage of the game. Those are the ones that really are here year-round. There's about 1,500, 1,800 of them, and those are the ones that we're really concerned about. As for the $8,000, it was my understanding, they never talked about 3 years ago that they were going to make a lifetime effort on this thing. I think they had 3 years to do it. They should have had the report back for the $25,000, and I don't see going on with them and spending more money and more time. We know what the problem is, and I agree with the mayor. A cull is important, and it's a cull more of the 1,500 to 1,800 local ones that we have that are here year-round.
Councillor Oates.
Okay, so refresh my memory. Where were we presented with the 1,500 to 1,800 local geese statistic? Because the presentation we had the other night, they identified the number of nests. And they specifically identified the number of nests over the last 3-year period in the Englishman River estuary and the Little Qualicum estuary. And the data they provided to us the other night, if I remember correctly, showed that the Little Qualicum estuary, their efforts were succeeding, and the number of geese were going down. And they were practicing similar efforts here at the Englishman River estuary, and the results were different. They were going up. Remember, they gave us a stat sheet, right? And if there's 1,500 local geese, I remember there was only like 50 or 60 nests, so the rest of them are just
71,
bachelors, I guess, or monogamous or something. But the point is that the efforts that they were making here weren't having the success that they were having at the Little Q. And then the question is well, what's the ultimate solution? Well, the ultimate solution is some sort of cull, getting rid of the geese altogether, and then that's how that all generated into that. And I understood that they were going to come back to us and they'd like to work with us so that we could eliminate as many barriers as we could to allow a cull to happen sometime in the immediate future. That's what I remember happening.
Music to my ears. So the report's due on March the 15th or middle of March. So let's wait till we get that report. Let's not jump the gun. But there's certainly, in terms of what the geese do, and one of the things that we should point out is you don't have to go very far to see what the geese are doing. They're eating grass over here at Stanford Place and on our property, and there's 50 or 60 of them at any given point in time walking around on the sidewalks and on the roads, defecating all over the place on the beach and so forth. I could go on all night. So let's wait and get that report on the 15th of March, and we'll see.
I think the way I understood it was they needed the 8,000 to get the report finalized. I think they're at a stalemate now, but I thought they required more time and more money in order to get the report done.
Councillor Beale.
That was not my understanding. My understanding was that the report is being worked on. It is just about complete. It's a very, very involved report. We certainly saw the mapping, etc., but the report should be ready for presentation the middle of March. So one of the researchers working on all the data is actually involved in a PhD program, so I think part of the report, in fact I know it, part of it is her work and probably has to meet certain specifications. The money, they did not specify what kind of money they would need in order to move forward, and they did not talk about any money being needed to complete the report. That was my understanding.
Next, curling club permissive exemption. Can I give everybody the background on this? The former council did a study under the guidance of Councillor Greer, Council Advisory Committee. And they came up, they had staff look at different procedures for permissive taxation, different policies that existed in different cities on the island. And they came up with essentially a policy that said that if it was strictly doing social impact work like the SOS and the Salvation Army and so forth and so on, they got 100%. Anybody that was borderline, or correct me if I'm wrong, anybody that was into the sports activity, you got 50%. That was approved by council. Everybody was notified. All of the clubs are notified. When I see in the paper that the lawn bowling club doesn't pay, the lawn bowling club doesn't pay because it's not in their lease that they have to pay. So that's the answer to that question. But in the lease that the curling club have with the RDN, they must pay their taxes. So I missed the presentation, but we have that. That's a policy of council as of now. So if the curling club permissive taxation, if they want an exemption, to me the only logical way to do that would be to change former council's policy on the 50% for a sports club organization. Because if you simply, in my humble opinion, if you simply give the curling club the $6,000, then what's from preventing anybody else? Then to me, it destroys, or it makes null and void the official policy that we have. Because other sports clubs will say, well, you did it for the curling club, why don't you do it for me? So that's the kicker in terms of the background. Councillor.
Well, exactly. If you're doing it for one, why aren't you doing it for the other? So in the presentation, they talked about another group that had a tax exemption. But it was never ever presented to council who that other group was. I know it was reported in the media, and you confirmed it that it's the lawn bowling club. And the explanation that you gave council is that they don't pay their tax because it's written in their lease?
It's not in the lease. They don't have to pay taxes. It's not in the lease. So there's no, it's silent about paying taxes, so they don't have to pay.
Is anybody paying taxes for that property?
If I may, Your Worship, when this policy was originally put in place, for 2000 and it was either 13 or 14, it became taxable. We requested the lawn bowling club to make the payment. They came back and said it's not in our lease, so we ended up paying it. After we discovered that it was not in their lease, we extended the exemption to it again so that it is untaxable. At the expiration of the current lease with the lawn bowling club, for them to pay taxes will be included in the lease, at which time the exemption will be removed or at least restricted to the 50%.
Okay. Is the property subject to property tax, the lawn bowling club?
Depending upon whether or not there's a permissive exemption, either yes or no. If there is no permissive exemption, then it is taxable. If there is a permissive exemption, then it's not taxable.
Okay, so guess what my next question is? Is the current lawn bowling club property under some sort of permissive tax exemption?
As of right this second, it is permissively exempt from taxation.
So it really has nothing to do with the lease. Well, no, but it has nothing to do with the lease because it's a piece of property that the city council, somebody has deemed gets a 100% exemption. Correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So if it was wrote into the lease that they paid the property tax, they'd still be paying zero, correct?
Unless council were to remove the permissive exemption.
No. Let's where we are today, there's a permissive tax exemption, which means there's this much paid in taxes. Zero paid in taxes. Correct?
Correct.
So if we wrote into the lease that they paid property taxes, they would be paying how much?
They would still be paying zero because the property is exempt from taxation.
Right. So when these people make the point to council that this property is being treated differently than this other property, there's some basis to that claim. Or there seems to me to be a relationship, a direct relationship between the two properties, one being a lawn bowling, and I don't want to get into the comparison whether lawn bowling is the same as curling, but in my mind, it's a recreation opportunity. So one recreation opportunity gets a 50% tax exemption, permissive tax exemption, and this other organization gets a 100% tax exemption. And that's the point they were making. Am I misunderstanding?
I can't argue that.
But I was under the impression that for them to pay tax, it's not in the lease that they have with the city at the present time.
Right now, the lease does not include a requirement for them to pay taxes. Council made the decision that that type of property would be or would gain a 50% permissive exemption, which made them taxable. Because they have a lease with the city, it's the city's property. Because it's taxable, the city is liable for that taxation. The same as the curling club is liable for the taxation, or at least the RDN would be liable for the taxation there. The lease that the curling club has with the RDN requires the curling club to pay all appropriate taxes associated with the property. Our lease with the lawn bowling club, because it was always permissively exempt, nobody ever thought to put paying taxes in the lease. So it wasn't in the lease. As soon as it became, council made the decision to make it taxable, then we as the owner were required to pay that tax. If we're also the jurisdiction that has the opportunity to exempt it, we exempted it so we wouldn't have to pay tax on our own property.
That makes sense. Councillor Greer and then Councillor Beale.
Thank you, Your Worship. I understand. I think from what I understand is that the lease runs out in 2018. Does it not? So at that time, we could charge them half of what we would come up with as taxes. The lawn bowling, yes. Sorry, did I say the curling right? Yeah, lawn bowling. Yeah, okay. And it's the mayor made a slight mistake there. It's not $6,000 for the curling club. It's $3,000. It went from 16 to 8 down to 6, and now it's down to 3. And so it's less than $10 a member to pay their taxes. Also, our hockey organization gave up our fundraising for parking cars at the Beach Fest and the Kids Fest, which brings in $3,000 or $4,000. We gave that up to the curlers so they could pay their taxes. So they now are in charge of that curling. So, you know, it's just a matter that they don't want to seem to pay anything. But I think we cooperated pretty good with handing over that fundraiser to them so they could pay their taxes.
Councillor Beale.
Thank you, Your Worship. Regarding the curling club and their presentation to council, they certainly provide a lot of detailed information about the various costs associated with the building, and my understanding is that with their lease that they do in fact look after much of the maintenance of the building, although the RDN did assist them with some costs. I don't know if local hockey players or others are responsible for the maintenance of the Oceanside Place, but I'll set that aside. This building is owned by the RDN on city land, which may make it, again, a little bit different from some other organizations. I thought the recommendation put forth by the RDN was quite thoughtful, which was requesting an exemption except for that part of the building which is used for commercial purposes, i.e. their particular lounge. So I don't know what would be involved in order for us to follow that recommendation. I don't know what we'd need to change in the past. But given that they are responsible for the maintenance of that building, that certainly is a substantial cost, I would think, to their nonprofit organization.
Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Beale stated almost exactly what I would have said. The only other thing that I want to say is that this is an organization that, just like the Island Tribute Festival, brings in tournaments and brings in money to this community and brings in recognition to the city of Parksville. And they do an amazing job with amazing amount of volunteer hours for this to occur. And I think it would be a shame that we can't work with them to some degree. And again, they do, as Councillor Beale was saying, have a lot of costs for that building, and it is an older establishment. So,
did anybody suggest to the curling club to go back to the RDN and get the RDN to remove from the lease the clause in the lease to have to pay taxes? Did anybody ask that question? Because that's another option that they have. They could go to the RDN. I agree with Councillor Patterson. They do great work and they bring tournaments to the community. They're an asset to the community.
Just for clarity, who pays us then? Who pays the city then?
I would imagine the RDN would have to pay us. So, I mean, those are options. If we want to help the curling club, we have a couple of options. We either change our bylaw that we have now that sporting clubs pay 50% and they pay 100%, or they go to the RDN and get the RDN to absorb that taxation that they now have to pay. Councillor Salter.
I thought they mentioned that they had been to the RDN. I thought they had mentioned that they already had been to the RDN and had not received any assistance from them.
Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think in that report, too, they also talked about if that building had to be demolished. I forget what year the rate would have been, 500 and something, and now it's 700 and some astronomical number to destroy that building. And I think we have a marriage made in heaven having the curlers in there because they need the ice. Otherwise, it would sit empty. And you know what? Who'd be paying for it but us? Because we're part of the RDN. It would be part of our taxes. And so the report they gave was like, what comes first? Because no matter what we do, we're going to end up paying it. And to me, the $3,000 was a lot cheaper than any of the other options that they put forward.
Councillor Oates.
So if we were to approve these requests here tonight, is there a budget line that comes out of, or is that over and above what's already, is there a place for this to come out of?
The CAO will answer that.
If I may, Your Worship, regardless of what we do here now, for 2015, that property is taxable. You can't do anything. You can't change it. The permissive taxation bylaw that designate who is exempt, who isn't exempt, must be approved and passed by Council October 31st of each year for the next year. So for 2015, it's fixed in stone. The first opportunity that you have to change anything through the permissive exemption policy would be October 31st this year for 2016. So in essence, this is not something that you have to make a decision of really until that bylaw must be given fourth reading and given to the assessment authority. If they want relief this year, it would have to be done through a grant and aid. You would have to pay them the money that they need to pay us through a grant and aid.
And Councillor Greer loves grant and aids. Yes, sir. Go ahead. One follow-up.
My question was, okay, so that's for the curling club. For the rest of the items, the Chamber Awards and the Estuaries and the Tribute Festival and the Film Commission, if we were to approve those items, are there line items in the budget for those now, or is that out of that contingency fund at $25,000?
If I may, Your Worship, the contingency amount is something that Council created for themselves. This is your money. It's up to you to decide whether it comes as part of the 25,000 or over and above the 25,000. It's your money.
I just want to caution council that if the decision by the majority of council is to give the curling club a grant and aid, is it definitely $3,000? Then be prepared for other organizations to come and say, well, why don't you do it for me? So that's just the tip of the iceberg. Okay, so have we discussed the curling club sufficiently? No, Councillor Greer.
Just one comment. I talked to some curlers today, and it seems that they're going to need a new curling rink sooner or later, and probably sooner rather than later. They were talking in the terms of, in the next 5 years, there's going to be a tremendous amount of expense. My suggestion to them was to get together with the Qualicum curlers, who are in this kind of the same situation. The city wants to use their facility for other things, and I think it's time for them to get a very strong lobby group together to see that they could build a new community curling club for the whole Oceanside area. And because they're putting good money after bad by spending any money in that old arena. And that's one reason the hockey guys moved out and so on, because it was just too costly. Of course, the new facility is much more costly, as I have found out since.
You can't win. Just for council's information, the RDN did prepare a report at the end of last year with regards to the Parksville Curling Club facility. And it's an old facility, and it's Councillor Greer is right. There's lots of things to be done, but that's the RDN's baby, and we'll leave it at that for the time being. But it's certainly an issue that's going to come back up. Okay, Chamber Business Award. We've always given to the Chamber Business, or we've always given to the Chamber Glassy, if I'm not mistaken. We've always contributed to that. I thought that was a line item.
If I may, Your Worship, I believe in the past Council has sponsored the Citizen of the Year. I'm not sure if this is the same thing.
Councillor Greer brought this request before council at the last council meeting. If I recall correctly, that was sort of time sensitive. I believe it was early March or something that the request was by, if I remember correctly. If so, then maybe we should deal with this as a one-off. Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Your Worship. And so when we did this originally, I supported it because it was for the Citizen of the Year award. I'm questioning whether the city should be sponsoring a chamber business award. And I'm the liaison to the chamber, and they've basically, they only have 4 categories now, where they used to have, I think, 6 or 7. And so I know it's a small amount, but I just question the appropriateness.
Why?
Because it's a business award, it's a Chamber of Commerce, and I don't know how many times I've heard Mr. Greer, or Councillor Greer, say if they can't raise the money themselves, what kind of bookkeepers are there? So I guess the same applies.
My God, we're going to, a marriage made in heaven. Councillor Patterson.
I support my fellow Councillor Sue Powell. Being a small businessman and being a chamber member, they've gone to a focus that it's a business excellence award, and I don't believe that the city should be in that category.
Thank you. Going back to Councillor Oates' comments, this amount of money is either due or not due. The decision has to be made. Do we want to vote on this tonight to get
The Excellence Awards are March 12th. The awards are March 12th.
Does anybody want to make a motion to support or not support the Chamber Business Award of $350? We support it. Is there a seconder for that motion? Well, you'll second the motion. Discussion on the motion.
think that we're seen as this is a small amount, so we're seen as partners with the business communities or against them. I think that it's a small request. I believe that we should be supporting this. I believe that we've supported it in the past, notwithstanding that the criteria has changed, and it's time sensitive. So I think we should support the request for $350.
Councillor Powell.
Your Worship, again, I would like to reiterate that I don't support this. And I think, we've supported the Chamber of Commerce and the business in this community in numerous ways. We've helped with the economic development. I think we gave them $10,000 last year. That's completely driven by the Chamber of Commerce. We've done other commitments with the Chamber. We knocked on doors. We talked to business communities. We touched base with them. We did that in partnership. And the $350, it's not necessarily the amount. It's the principle of the thing. And it's $350 that they change without any consultation with the people who support them, they never talk to the city about the Citizenship Award. I loved supporting the Citizenship Award because it acknowledged people in our community. There's numerous ways that businesses are acknowledged through the city, and I think we do enough, and I won't support it.
Councillor Beale.
Thank you, Your Worship. It might seem odd, but I also do not think I'll support this motion. And it seems to me that a business award is an award by peers. It's a group of peers, and that doesn't seem to me the sort of thing that the city would necessarily become involved with. It's quite different from a different sort of event or an activity. So if this is the business community selecting someone within the business community to receive this award, it just should be in-house, in my opinion.
Councillor Patterson.
And I echo. I think that we could find something else for $350, a sign, something to the chamber, something to so many other options than that, than these awards at this point.
Councillor Greer.
Just one last comment. We can certainly find ways to spend $350. That is not a problem with this council. Over the last 6 years, we have more and more people coming for a handout or for donation or for sponsorship. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. So get used to people coming to the city and making some decisions. And I think we have to look at the situation where there's a lot of people, somebody lives up on Hearst Street or wherever, they have no interest in any of these things. And we keep giving away their taxpayers' dollars. So we got to give things a big consideration.
Well, the final word for me, we certainly as a city have formed a strategic partnership with the Chamber of Commerce. I don't quite see it as it's the Chamber that's making the business award and we're sponsoring the business award. And I think that's okay with me, I think, in terms of strategic partnerships with the community, with the businesses, is something that we should do as a city. So on that note, unless there's any further comments, I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? That motion is... Please let the Chamber of Commerce know that they're not getting $350 from the city. Okay, oh God, thank God we dealt with the archival storage building. We've talked about this before at other budget meetings with other councils. Frankly, it's something that's been spinning around and spinning around. I'm going to open this up to council members to see what they have to say. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Do we have any staff feedback rather than throwing it around council? Because we're on page 9 and we have 22 pages, and I know that this discussion can take a fair amount of time.
CAO, do you want to make any comments at this point in time?
If I may, Your Worship, this is something that staff is throwing out to you as council to see if there's any interest in us pursuing it. The community park is basically at its saturation level. There really isn't the ability for us to accommodate other functions. I think it is time for us to start looking at the possibility of fees to regulate the use of the park. The same thing to a certain extent with sports field user fees. They're not a heck of a lot different than an ice rink, for instance. People pay money to play hockey. It takes us time, effort to ensure the sports fields are maintained at a usable level. So should not the users be paying some fee for that use? In essence, that's what the two are. If there's interest from council for us to pursue that, we certainly will.
Would it be as simple as asking staff to look at what other communities do in terms of relevancy to, especially the sports field user fees, what they are, how they collect them, and as I'll take a page out of Councillor Greer's book, will we have to hire another person to look after that? Could staff, would that be a reasonable request to make to staff?
For the sports fields, certainly. I know communities that are charging user fees for sports fields right now. Okay. So yes, we can certainly do that. That's
Councillor Salter.
I'm not interested in charging any children money to come and play soccer in our fields. I grew up in this community. I played in those fields myself. I marched in a band down the street, went down to the community park, was involved in parades and blah, blah, blah. There is no way that I would expect. My children also played soccer, football, baseball in the fields here, and they did not have to pay. And thank goodness, because we probably couldn't have afforded it. So I would absolutely not agree to this.
Any other comments, Councillor Powell?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd also, if you're going to do a report on this, could you also find out the types of users of the park and what it's being used for, and the age groups, etc.? Because I, like Councillor Salter, I have an issue with charge. Like, it's the last place people can go who live below the poverty line or don't have a lot of money, can go for free and do activities.
Councillor Beale.
Perhaps I need some clarification, because my take on this was that this would be referring to sports user groups that are booking the field. So, for instance, we've got soccer leagues and of that sort. I'm not picturing people going down and just having a pickup game of soccer over in an area of the field. So these are leagues and other organized sports. Is that correct?
If I may, Your Worship, that's what I would be looking at. I know that most organizations, right now, there is a registration fee for kids or adults or whatever to play organized sports. And they need that for whatever cost of equipment, et cetera, that the organization has. But to date, the City of Parksville receives absolutely nothing for those sports organizations using our fields.
Councillor Salter.
And so all that would do is those costs would end up back coming out of the pockets of the parents. It would just increase the cost to be involved with that sport. That's all. And I absolutely agree with Councillor Powell. This is our last bastion that's free. This is it. And so adding costs to a park, to utilize a park for sports, which is something we should be promoting, and whatever else we're doing with it as well. That's a community park. Let's just save some money out of this budget here, and then we don't have to charge anybody to use our park.
Just a comment on your observation. It's free. It's not free. I wish it was, but there's no free lunch anymore. The city, we spend $1.5 million on our parks every year. Taxpayers pay for that.
Follow up. I'm to the community who use it.
Okay, Councillor Oates.
That's the point that I wanted to make there. So if this is on the reason this is here for council's consideration is, as I understand it, is because in order for us to provide these sports fields, there's a cost to the city. And those costs, that cost, so we're not talking about gating the sports fields and having a vending machine there or something, coin op to get in. We're talking about if organized groups are using these sports fields, they would be charged a fee. So I guess what that says to me is if my kid's in soccer here in Parksville and he's playing in a game in Nanaimo, the city of Nanaimo is generating a fee when he goes and he plays there, but the city of Parksville is not getting one when he comes here. I think that's what we'll find when you find the research, because the notion of sports field user fees is not uncommon. But the point is not that we're trying to generate extra revenue out of this. We're trying to mitigate the cost of providing the service, because the service is certainly not free. We have to maintain those fields at a certain safety level in order to eliminate any liabilities that we might have. So the suggestion here, as I understand it, is this is an opportunity to recoup some of the costs of us providing these fields for free.
Councillor Beale.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think it's important at this time to wait and get some information, and I think that then we can move forward with that. I don't know what the suggested fees might be or what's in line with other communities, and also what would that mean or likely mean in terms of increased charges for whether it be children or older players on the field. I would also like to add that I know that in some communities there is actually then, when you sign up for soccer or whatever it is through the city, that there is in fact a different rate for city residents and for players coming from outside the city, recognizing that is otherwise a double tax for those families. So that's also maybe something to consider.
Very good point. Any further comments? Councillor Greer?
Thank you, Your Worship. I certainly agree with Councillors Salter and Paul. This is the last bastion for families to use our facilities for nothing. And I'm all for user fees. There's no question about that. And for hockey players, I know it costs an arm and a leg to have your kid play hockey. And that eliminates an awful lot of people. So those people have to fall into using our parks facilities. And I think if we're trying to cover some of the costs, I think there's a lot of things in this budget we could cut in favor of helping to offset the costs of our parks.
I just want to remind everybody again that there's no such thing as free. And when we're talking at long-term budgets down the road, this all takes money. And I don't disagree with the fact that we want to make it as affordable as possible, but keep in mind that it's not free. Councillor Owen.
Can we not find a method where everybody is satisfied? Nobody wants to pass on an added cost to families to participate in these programs. So, I'm aware of like shared use agreements where we say that we don't charge the school districts, or we don't charge the soccer club, or we don't charge that. But we do charge the out-of-town tournament guys that are coming here and using our fields, that have the ability to pay. So I'm with you on the, let's not go double nailing it to the poor families, the kids that has their opportunity to go there. Well, I mean, we're paying for it, and I'm fine with us continuing to pay for those people to be there. But there's other people, maybe there's opportunities there to put in user fees that don't target the people that we've expressed a concern about.
Okay, Councillor, is that okay with you with the CAO? Can you do that? Can you look into that or have staff look into it? Okay. So that was almost $1 million of discussion. We'll move on.
Thank you, Your Worship. So just a revised 20-year capital plan based on the adjustments we have made to remove the items we did and to the spending packages. And also a revised financial plan for the 5 years. So these are in your handouts, so hopefully they'll be a little bit bigger so that you could look at them in your leisure. And that's the second part of the financial plan, showing that we will be bringing a balanced budget for each of the 5 years in the plan.
Pam, could you go back to the 20-year capital plan?
Certainly.
Just before. I just wanted to draw Council's attention to the 2020-2034 budget of $61 million. So the decisions we make today are going to affect that amount, depending on what we have in the budget, what we don't have in the budget. So continue.
Thank you. Requested at the last meeting was that we bring back a chart itemizing the amount of the labor-related costs. This first chart is just the operating expenses.
It's over there. That's your document there. Excuse me, Pam. Hold on a minute. Page 13. Page 13 on this one. No. This one here. That one over there.
It's in your PowerPoint handout.
Page 13. Councillor Greer is ready. Page 13.
Okay. This chart is a breakdown of the 2015 operating costs, and this is just strictly operating costs. And you'll see the labor is 74% of the overall operating costs. The next chart is operating and capital for 2015. And in this one, you will notice that the labor basically has dropped to 55%, but the contract services has increased from 3% to 27%. So those are the two charts. One is strictly operating and one is operating and capital.
Councillor Oates?
Why the big increase in contracted services? What's the explanation for that?
Most of our capital projects, such as roads, water, sewer, are handled by contractors. Okay, so those are basically the changes in the general fund, and based on that, this is what the projected surplus looks like at the end of 15 years. So you'll notice in 2023, our reserves actually dip into the negative. They come back up for 24 and 25, and then dip again in 2026 to 2028. And this is based on the 2.5% increase this year. Okay, so that's it for the general fund. Is there any other questions before we move on to the water fund?
Councillor Beale.
Thank you, and forgive me if this was explained elsewhere, but with the projected general fund, et cetera, surplus at the end of the year, I know that right now the proposal includes a 2.5% increase. Are there increases that are planned for all along in this longer range plan?
For 2015, there's a 2.5% increase, and then for 2016 to 2020, we go up to 3%, and then I believe it drops back to 2%.
Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Your Worship. How come it dips in 2023?
Those capital projects that His Worship was mentioning, a lot of them are in 2023.
Councillor Greer.
Yeah. Thank you. Just wondering, you have a balanced budget of $3,149,000 this year. Is that including this $13 million we have surplus from last year? Where has that gone?
That is cumulative from last year's surplus. So we take last year's surplus, we add in any surplus or deficits that we have this year, and we come up with that figure.
So what you're saying is we've spent the $13 million somewhere from last year?
I'm not sure what 13 million you're speaking of. I just know in the general fund, this is what the projected surplus would be. There might be 13 million with the water fund and the sewer fund and some restricted reserves that we have. But the accumulated unrestricted surplus, I would believe, was only about 4.5 million at the end of the year.
Well, we had an email from our CEO stating we had a $13 million surplus, which council could decide on what to do with that.
I don't think he said that.
And I'm holding him to that.
Ayo.
If I may, Your Worship, through Councillor Greer, that's something that I explained to Council as part of the orientation. And actually in that very same email that you were talking about, I also explained where those funds go. And in essence, you're right, there was $13 million. That $13 million plus the revenues that you would accrue over 2015 through 2019, less the expenses that are in the budget, equate to a surplus at the end of 2019 of $1,857,753. And if you want me to supply to Council exactly the rationale and where that goes, I can certainly provide it to you again.
Well, it seems to me that I've seen these numbers before at the 2020 mark, where we're going to be down to $1 million and so on, and yet over the last 6 years, we've continued to grow a surplus. And as of last year, we did have the $13 million. So, I mean, I don't know how you do all these numbers, but they certainly don't. They're more complex than what I understand, and I know a little bit about budgets.
CAO.
All I can do is, once again, provide Council with the rationale and where that money goes to. It's numbers. It's black and white. I can show you exactly where it goes to, as I have. So it's there, and I will provide it to Council again.
Those figures have all been allocated for capital projects over the next 20 years. So if
no, we have over $30 million in deposit for capital expenditures.
No,
this was beside the point.
Wait a minute. No, we don't.
Again, Your Worship, if you look at the financial statements that Councillor Greer is referring to at the beginning, at the beginning of 2014 and of 2013, there was approximately $30 million worth of assets. But when you go through allocating the assets to such things as current liabilities, in other words, accounts payable at that time, statutory reserves that the funds are specifically allocated to very specific things that cannot be used for just anything, that $30 million went down to the $13 million. If you then take that $13 million and allocate it, as Council did, for the next 5 years on the operating and capital expenditures that Council felt were required for the city, by the time you got to the end of that 5 years, it was down to $1,857,753.
So we shouldn't really call it a $13 million surplus then? Well, because I have an email right here that states that.
What I'd like to propose for the next budget meeting is we start off with that very presentation that you're talking about, that you've given us earlier at orientation, and what you're repeating again tonight, because I think it's very important that Council understand that. Councillor Salter, you had your hand up? No? Councillor Oates? Move on, please, ma'am. Water fund.
Thank you, Your Worship. We did go back and look at the water fund. The building blocks that we retained are that this plan assumes Plan A of the ERWS treatment intake project, which includes grants of $9 million a year in 2015 and 16, and long-term borrowing in 2015 and 16 of $2.4 million and $2.25. Again, this model does not include any 2014 carry-forwards. The budget adjustments we did was we looked at the rates.
Sorry, Councillor Salter.
Thank you, Your Worship. So my question is, these grants of 2015, 2016, $9,000 per year, is that the ones that we're hoping for? Or, sorry, $9 million. Is that what we're hoping for? But we don't have. Okay.
And praying.
And Okay.
Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Worship. And so I also have a question about the $9 million each year, because I think that's pretty optimistic. And so what is it going to do to our budget long term if we don't get that?
CAO.
If I may, Your Worship, we've actually taken a conservative approach. As Council is aware, the last Council meeting you approved water utility rate increases of 2%. If we were to actually get those grants, the water rate increase only would have to be 1%. So we've assumed the worst in case of revenue, assumed the best in case of expenditure. So we're taking the conservative approach. We've, in essence, at least for the first 5 years of the program, we've overstated the expenses, so we've taken the conservative approach.
Small c.
Right. If in fact we don't get those grants, the expenditures would have to change. They would actually increase, but it would be out further than the 5 years that we're looking at right now that the increase would be shown.
Thank you. Councillor Salter.
Oh, so then the long-term borrowing of $2.4 million and then the $2.25 million would remain the same, or would that now go up, even though we've put our rates up by 2%, and we're saying, okay, well, you know, if this money comes through, we drop that down to 1%. However, we're still going to need to borrow more money, aren't we? If that money doesn't come through, we're still going to have to borrow more money.
We're going to have to borrow considerably more money if we don't get in essence, $18 million in grants. To a large extent, that $18 million would have to be reconfigured in terms of long-term debt. But the other part of this is that the Plan A options assumes that we're doing everything in a 20-year time frame, basically 2016 for 20 years. The option, or Plan B option 4, is assuming a 30-year time frame. So we have more time to fund the project over, and it also reduces the risk. It will cost more, but the risk is less, and you have more time to fund it over.
And so, where was I going with that? So, the 1% then, if we have to now, so we don't get our $9 million that we're hoping for, then that 1% doesn't, it's a wash, right? It's 2%. There is no, doesn't go down to 1%. Now we've had to borrow.
What we've assumed is the revenue scenario of option 4B, which indicated a 2% rate increase was necessary as far as the revenues are concerned, but we've assumed the Plan A expense options. If we get the grants that's assumed in Plan A, the increase could have only been 1%. So we've overstated the revenues and understated the expenses with regards to those plans. If the money doesn't come through, as far as the first 5 years is concerned, the money that we've got budgeted is too much. We could actually reduce that, and over that, or at least the borrowing would increase, but it would be spread out over 30 years as opposed to 25, or over 20, sorry.
Just to clarify then, if the $9 million cannot be borrowed, if we don't get the grant dollars and we have to borrow, that 2% that we're saying could go down to 1% if we get the grant dollars, but if we don't, it's a wash. It's 2%. That does not go down.
Correct.
Is that correct? Okay.
That's correct.
That's what I would.
Thank you, Your Worship. So the revisions that we did was we dropped the rate increases to 2% in 2015, 1.5% in 2016 to 2018, and 2% from 2019 to 2021. And those are in this model. The spending packages, we just dropped one of the spending packages, and that was the signage, so that is no longer in, and so that is just operating for $39,000 of additional costs this year. Then we go to the 20-year capital plan. Again, it's just a summary of all the projects in the next 20 years. Then the overview of the provisional financial plan for the water fund for the next 5 years, showing our balanced budget for the whole plan. Again, hopefully you can see them a little bit bigger on your printout. And then we focus on the unrestricted surplus for the water fund. Now you'll notice we'll start off with over $2 million in 2015. By 2018, we're down to less than $1 million. We hang around the $1 million mark until 2023, where we actually go down, but then we start gradually coming back up with still 2 low years in 25 and 26. And that's it for the water fund.
Any further questions from council before we go to the audience? Councillor Salter.
Is this the last of the budgets? Because I would really like to have time to go over the budget before I show up here. Because there's a lot of information in here that we're just flying through it. I'm going to go home now, and then I'm going to go through it, and then I'm going to have questions and come back in here. And I may even be repeating questions that we've already discussed because I'm not able to follow it because I just got this in front of me tonight. And it's big. This is, for me, it's daunting. I have to slowly go through it.
We're going to have, that's why I've said from the very beginning that this is a process that we can take as much time as you need. So there won't be another budget meeting until Councillor Greer gets back from his sojourn in the desert. So you've got lots of time. You can talk to staff in the meantime. We'll probably all will review the budget, and we'll come back to another budget meeting probably sometime in April.
Okay, and I just want to finish, but when that happens, when we come to the next budget, I would like the opportunity to look at it prior to us coming here. Like, I'd like to be able to go through it myself on my time, so that I have questions that make sense and I can understand the answers.
You go through what we were given tonight. Will there be much change? I don't think so. There won't be very much change in terms of the documentation you have now. Well, you have it now. That's what you have now, plus this booklet here is what you can go through over the next month. Director of Finance.
Thank you, Your Worship. The next presentation is going to include the carry forwards, and we'll have our surpluses for 2014 calculated as well. So there will be some changes, primarily in the capital.
Okay. Turn your microphone on, please.
My question was, is there more that I have to see before the next budget meeting? That was my question. I thought I heard yes, there is. And so my question was, well, if there's more, then I would like it prior to coming in here to see at night. And then I believe Councillor Greer said, oh, this is it right here. Is that the case?
The Director of Finance will tell us what more we'll have at the next meeting, but this will be the bulk of it. Do you want to repeat what you said a moment ago, please?
Yeah, just the carry forward information from 2014, the projects that are being carried forward. There's some operating and some capital. They'll be included, and we'll show council what those carry forward items are. And also, we will know by then what our surpluses are for 2014, how we fared versus budget, and then that would be included in it as well.
So I guess what I'm hearing Councillor Salter say, would it be possible to have that information, say, 10 days before the meeting? Would that be possible? Could we structure it that way? Would that be satisfactory? Okay. Okay, the CAO is shaking his head saying yes. Thank you. Okay, Councillor Beale.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I would like to acknowledge the sentiments shared by Councillor Salter. I myself was feeling very anxious before coming to the meeting because I felt that I wasn't as prepared as I like to be. That being said, I was reassured when I relaxed and understood that we can in fact take time, and having the information presented here, anything that we don't need to rush into making decisions. And so I think that, I'm learning a little bit there that receiving the information here, I agree that it makes it hard sometimes to really formulate a clear question on the spot. That being said, I appreciate that other people bring up questions and points of view, and that I hope that we can all agree as council that whenever someone feels like I often do, like I need a little more time, that we can take that time and go away from the table. But it has been nice not feeling like I've had to spend all day going over everything, and actually coming here, it's a little bit more relaxing than it has been in the past. And it's so important.
You'll recall I said at the first meeting we've got until May the 15th, so there's no hurry. There's no hurry to go and rush these things through. We'll take all the time that's needed, and you've got the documentation from tonight, which everybody can take the time to go through, and then you'll be given the documentation, as the CAO has said, 10 days before the next meeting. But it's not really, it's when you're talking about surpluses and things like that, it's relevant, but not to the extent that the information we have in our hands now that's relevant. Councillor Greer.
Yeah, just one comment. I agree that we should have the information before we come to council, because we sit here and we're hitting it cold on, and it's hard to follow instantly all the time. So it's good to have the information ahead of time. As you know, I was going to pass a motion tonight to freeze taxes. However, the fact that we haven't gone very far tonight, and I'm going to spend the next my holidays in Palm Springs over the next 3 weeks reading this 2015 and 19 draft provincial financial plan, I won't have that good a time, Mark. And so my motion will be kept until we come back, and I'm assuming we're not going to have any more financial meetings until I do come back. And I've asked the CAO about that, and he's guaranteed me he's not going to have any more.
Well, there's no guarantees in life, if you're going to be away that long, and we never know. Go ahead.
If I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor Greer, it's not up to me whether or not you have another budget meeting. It's up to council. So talk to your fellow council members.
Well, I think the council will certainly agree with me that we should wait till I come back, because I ask a lot of questions.
But don't stay as long as the time you got bit by the rattlesnake. Before we adjourn, the audience has been very patient. Any questions from the audience? Yes? Well, the commitment that we've made to the PDBA is that there will be, after the AGM, which I believe is on March the 10th, there will be, hopefully with our MOU, we'll have a meeting with the absentee property owners, the downtown property owners. The purpose of that is to, I'm going to make it a little bit lengthy in my answer. The purpose of that is to find out, given what's been done in the downtown already, the co-op, Wells Street, the insurance companies, what can the city do? And that's why this budget deliberation can be extended a bit, because I certainly, as mayor, would like to see the downtown, I'd like to see us to do more. We have a request, for example, from the Craig Street merchants for waste baskets and for flags and for benches and stuff like that, and staff are working on a cost of that. So we'll have that information by the time we have our next budget. And the whole idea is to look for wiggle room. When Councillor Greer talked about the surpluses and all that, that money has been committed, but maybe we'll decommit some of that money to do certain things depending on the cost. There's talk about a sidewalk. There's no sidewalk on Wells Street, and that's where all the new buildings are. Should there be a sidewalk? And I think that we could get into that level of detail as we come to a conclusion about the budget and about the tax increases or decreases or whatever you want to talk about. But the short answer is yes. The long answer is that we'll have to look at all of these things, because in my mind, I don't know about the rest of my fellow councillors, but I think that downtown revite is pretty important. The downtown is old and tired and so forth and so on.